Your choice reveals a pattern you repeat without noticing, and that is why this moment matters. The cup that pulls you first can show the quiet way you freeze what hurts, even when you call it peace. This is a Jungian test, but it is also a gentle mirror, because the psyche often speaks in symbols before it speaks in explanations. What seems like ice can be feeling held still, protected by persona, shadow, and the old wish to stay safe from pain. Sometimes the heart does not stop feeling, it only learns to cool itself so it can survive one more day. That is why your first pull matters, because a fast choice can reveal an inner habit before your mind begins to tidy it up. Do not think too long now, just look at the cups, feel the first small spark, and choose one from 1 to 5. First impression sees things that logic often covers, so stay with the cup that reached you before you explained yourself. In many Jung Test moments, the image arrives first, and the meaning unfolds later, when the body has time to tell the truth. Maybe you avoid what you feel by staying useful. Maybe you postpone it. Maybe you explain it away, or maybe you go numb and distant. Whatever your pattern is, it did not appear for no reason, and that is why I want to meet it with care, not shame. By the end, I will link your choice to one specific, practical step, something small you can do today when the old freezing begins again. At first it may sound simple, but only at the end will the deeper meaning open, because only then will you see where protection ends and longing begins. You may think you are only choosing a cup, yet the cup can also reveal the shape of your inner winter and the feeling beneath it. If this touches something tender in you, stay close to that feeling, because what aches is often the very place that needs warmth. You do not need to force a revelation tonight. You only need to notice what draws you, what unsettles you, and what you usually leave unfelt. The symbol is small, but the door it opens can be intimate, honest, and quietly life-changing if you let yourself enter it. So breathe, trust your first pull, and keep watching, because when we finally connect your cup to one clear action, you will understand why it chose you. And maybe for the first time in a while, you will see that what looked like distance was really protection, and what looked like coldness was a tired form of love trying to keep you safe. Stay until the end, and let this small symbol tell you where to begin again, softly now. If you chose option 1, this often happens when you learn to stay light on the surface, because going deeper once felt too risky. Pay attention to this, because option 1 is rarely about not feeling enough, and much more often about feeling fast and then covering it before it can ask anything of you. In a Jungian test, the first cup can become a symbol of a person who keeps emotion moving just enough to avoid being changed by it. The image is simple, thin ice floating in a quiet cup, but the psyche behind it is not simple at all, because this is what the shadow does when it fears the full heat of truth. On the outside you may look open, easy, even warm, yet inside there is a quiet reflex that says, keep it moving. Smile, shift the subject. Do not stay here too long. Stay with me, because this pattern can look harmless, but it often begins in places where deep feeling was met with chaos, silence, embarrassment, or the pressure to grow up too quickly. Maybe as a child you sensed that big emotion made the room unstable, so you became the one who stayed charming, useful, agreeable, or distracted, and little by little your light learned to perform, while your shadow carried the heavier weather alone. That is why option 1 often belongs to the gentle evader, the simplified archetype of someone who survives by staying near feeling without fully entering it, someone who tastes emotion but refuses to sit down and eat the whole meal. Pay attention to this part, because the gift in this pattern is real. You can bring ease into tense places, you can soften heavy rooms, and you often know how to keep life moving when others freeze. But the shadow cost is quieter and more painful, because the feelings you skim over do not disappear. They wait, they harden at the edges, and then they return as restlessness, distance, irritation, or a sadness with no clear name. You see it in real life, in very ordinary moments. Someone you love disappoints you, and instead of pausing long enough to feel hurt, you laugh a little, say it is fine, open your phone, and let the moment slide past your own heart. Or a friend asks what is wrong, and you answer with a polished version that protects everyone, including you, while the truer feeling stays just beneath the surface, asking for one honest minute. This is where Jung helps in a simple way. What stays unfelt does not stay gone. It slips into the shadow, and from there it starts shaping tone, choices, relationships, and even the strange tiredness that visits when nothing looks terribly wrong. So if option 1 found you, do not rush to call yourself shallow or avoidant and move on, because that would only repeat the same move again, turning pain into speed before it can become understanding. Instead, notice the kindness hidden inside the defense, because some part of you once believed that if you stayed light, quick, and pleasant enough, you could keep love, keep peace, or at least keep yourself from drowning in what no one knew how to hold. That is powerful, but it is not the end of the story, so stay with me here, because healing for this pattern begins the moment you stop admiring your smoothness long enough to ask what it protects. Today, when you feel the first urge to joke, scroll, tidy, help someone else, or say it is nothing, pause for exactly 90 seconds. Place one hand on your chest and name the feeling underneath with one plain word before you do anything else. Pay attention to what happens next, because the goal is not drama, it is contact, and that small pause teaches your inner world that feeling something fully is safer than abandoning yourself in the name of staying easy to love. And once you can stay, the light in you stops performing and starts becoming real warmth slowly too. If you chose option 2, this usually appears when you can explain your feelings with perfect clarity, but still cannot stay inside them long enough to feel their full weight. Pay attention to that split, because option 2 often belongs to the person who knows how to translate emotion into neat language, while another part of the self stands behind glass, watching, waiting, and refusing to come closer. The cup itself reflects that conflict. Clear glass suggests honesty, yet the cloudy frost hiding what sits beneath the surface reveals the old bargain between desire and fear. One part of you wants to know what is true, and another part wants distance before truth can change anything. That is why this pattern can look so composed from the outside. In Jungian language, the light side of this style is insight, restraint, and the ability to stay thoughtful under pressure. But the shadow appears when understanding becomes a shield and explanation replaces contact. Stay with me here, because the interesting part is not that you avoid feeling, but that you come very near it. You circle it with words, you study it, you give it shape, history, motive, and context. And for a moment that almost feels like intimacy, until the heart notices it has still not been touched. Maybe this began in a home where strong emotion was either dismissed or made too dramatic to trust. Maybe the safest role was being the calm one, the reasonable one, the child who could understand everyone else before asking who was understanding them. Pay attention to that image, because many people build a polished inner narrator long before they build a safe inner room. You can see it in daily life in scenes that almost seem too small to matter until they repeat. Someone you care about says something that lands wrong over dinner. You smile, nod, and answer with balance. On the drive home, you replay every word, not to feel the sting, but to solve it, edit it, frame it, and make it sensible enough to survive. Then comes the quiet climax. Much later, when the house is dark or the shower is running or the screen finally goes black, the feeling returns without its polished coat. Not as a theory, but as a pressure in the chest, a thickness in the throat, a look you remember, a sentence you wish had sounded different. In that moment, the inner conflict is no longer abstract. Desire wants closeness, fear wants control, and the shadow waits in the space between them, asking how long you plan to keep translating what really needs to be felt. This is why option 2 can feel so personal. It does not point to a lack of depth. It points to a mind that became a lantern in the dark and forgot that lanterns are meant to help you enter the room, not live forever at the doorway. There is intelligence here, grace here, even beauty here, but none of that can replace the simple courage of staying with one unedited emotion until it stops being an idea and becomes an experience. Stay with me for one more turn, because this is the part most people miss. The real problem is not overthinking. The real problem is using thought like frost on a window, clear enough to trace the outline of longing, thick enough to keep the air itself from touching your skin. Once you see that, the pattern changes from a personality trait into a choice you can interrupt. Today, set a timer for 15 minutes, Sit with a blank page and write only the feeling you are trying to explain, not the reasons, not the history, not the other person's motives. Each time your mind starts interpreting, return to one sentence that begins with "I feel," and stay there until one honest word arrives that makes your chest soften and the room grows still around what you have been avoiding for months. If you chose 3, this often begins where trust once cracked, at the exact moment you needed it most, and something inside you made a private vow never to be caught unprotected again. That is the emotional cause hidden under this choice. The pattern is not coldness by nature. It is warmth taught to wear armor. In Jungian terms, the persona learns to look steady, strong, and almost impossible to shake, while the softer part goes underground and waits in silence. Stay with me because this is where people misunderstand themselves. They think they are being practical, when in truth, they are practicing avoidance with excellent posture. They think they are simply decisive, when what they really fear is the helplessness that can follow an honest feeling. The cup with one solid block of ice mirrors that inner arrangement. Nothing spills, nothing trembles, everything seems contained. But inside that stillness, there is pressure, there is memory. There is a self that learned to survive by turning hurt into discipline and disappointment into distance. Here is an unexpected twist. The stronger your persona looks, the easier it becomes for other people to miss the fact that your heart is working very hard just to stay unreadable. And because they miss it, you may start missing it too. That is how the pattern keeps repeating. You call it self-control, others call it maturity. Yet many times it is avoidance with a polished face. Think of a real scene from everyday life. At work, you take on more than you should because it is easier to carry too much than to admit you need support. You answer messages quickly, deliver what you promised, and keep your tone calm, even when your body is tired. Then someone changes the plan at the last minute or forgets a commitment that mattered to you. You do not complain. You do not ask for repair. You grow quieter. Your replies become shorter. You tell yourself, this is efficiency. But the real movement happens underneath. A door closes. The shadow says, do not need anything from them again. Or picture a relationship scene. The person you love says they will call, and they do not. When they finally reach out, they sound casual and warm as if nothing happened. You feel the sting at once, yet your persona steps forward before the feeling can speak. You say no problem. You stay composed. You make dinner. You fold the laundry. You become useful. Later the room is silent, and that old hardness returns not as a decision but as a climate. You answer less. You give less. You begin protecting yourself without naming the wound. See what happens next. The story you tell yourself becomes, I am just being careful now, but beneath that sentence lives a quieter truth. I am afraid that if I stay open, I will be at the mercy of someone else again. This is the mini-climax of option 3. The pain is not in the broken promise alone. It is in the speed with which your inner world converts hurt into control and turns longing into distance. Once you notice that, you also notice the cost. Decisions made from armor look clean, but they often leave tenderness behind. Commitments kept from pride can become heavy instead of meaningful, and the life you build may look solid while feeling strangely untouched from the inside. Still, there is a gift in this pattern. You know how to endure. You know how to follow through. You know how to stand up when other people collapse. The work now is not to lose that strength, but to bring choice back into it, so your decisions serve your life instead of your defenses. Today, choose one commitment you have delayed, because it requires an honest conversation or a clear decision. Write the exact next step in one sentence, set a timer for 15 minutes, and complete that step before the day ends without editing your intention to look stronger, calmer, or easier than you really feel. That is where the ice begins to crack in the right way and strength becomes truth instead of hiding again. If you chose 4, this often begins when control feels safer than surrender, because some part of you is afraid that if you finally let the feeling move, you will lose something you still hope to keep. Pay attention to that tension, because option 4 usually belongs to the person who keeps one hand on the door, while pretending they are calmly deciding whether to stay or leave. The symbol is almost melting ice in a delicate cup, and that image matters because it shows a life that wants movement but fears the cost of change. In simple Jungian terms, the shadow here is not dramatic rebellion, but the quiet storehouse of postponed truth. The need, the anger, the grief, the desire that keeps waiting for a better moment. The limitation in this pattern is not weakness. It is the habit of keeping yourself suspended so nothing can fully break and nothing can fully begin. You notice this more often than you let yourself say, because delaying a choice can look so reasonable from the outside that even you start calling it patience. Stay with me, because what looks like patience is sometimes fear of losing love, approval, security, or the version of yourself that has survived by never moving first. Here is the everyday scene. Someone asks where this relationship is going, and you answer with maybe soon, maybe later, maybe when things are calmer and both of you can feel the room cool down. Or at work, a good offer arrives, and instead of saying yes or no, you begin making one more list, one more plan, one more careful argument until the chance starts thinning at the edges. That is the mini climax of option 4, because the thing you fear losing can slowly disappear, not from one dramatic mistake, but from too many careful delays. You tell yourself you are keeping peace, but the shadow hears something else. It hears the fear of change whispering that a clear answer will end an illusion. You are not ready to grieve. This is why option 4 feels so intimate, because beneath the careful surface, there is often a person who longs to surrender, but mistrusts what surrender will ask them to become. The truth is that surrender does not always mean losing. Sometimes it means letting reality replace fantasy, and that can feel like grief before it feels like relief. Pay attention to that turning point, because it is where fear of change stops looking wise and starts revealing the small prison your old limits have built. Once you see the prison, you can also see the door, and that is where choice returns, not as a theory but as a clean yes or a clean no. Today choose one delayed decision that matters to your real life, send the message, make the call or close the door, and give yourself 20 minutes to say either yes or no without adding one more condition. Because each time you postpone the truth, you train your body to confuse uncertainty with safety, and slowly the life you wanted becomes a hallway you keep walking without entering any room. See how subtle this is? You may not be running away in obvious ways. You may simply be waiting for the perfect sign, the perfect mood, the perfect certainty, and calling that wisdom. But life rarely opens that way, and the deeper self knows it, which is why this choice often arrives for people who are tired of hovering at the edge of their own becoming. So if this option unsettles you, that may be good, because what shakes here is not your worth, but the old agreement that said delay is safer than truth. When you answer clearly, you do not lose yourself. You meet yourself. And once the answer is spoken, the fear that ruled the room usually shrinks faster than expected, and the future finally has something real to stand on, and you stop circling the same edge now. If you chose 5, something in you is already leaning toward transformation, even if the rest of you still calls it uncertainty. This choice usually appears when momentum has begun under the surface, and the old shape of your life can no longer hold what you are becoming. Pay attention to that, because option 5 is not the symbol of a person who wants a dramatic escape. It is the sign of someone who has reached the point where repeating the same pattern feels heavier than risking a new one. That is why this choice carries force. It belongs to the part of you that is tired of circling the same fear, tired of rehearsing the same postponement, tired of fitting into a mold that once protected you and now quietly shrinks you. In simple Jungian language, this is close to individuation, the courage to gather the split pieces of yourself and let them begin to live in one direction. It is not perfection. It is integration. It is the moment when the self stops asking only what is safe and starts asking what is true. Stay with me here, because this is where the inner tension rises. One side of you still wants the familiar story, even if it is cramped and stale, because the known at least has edges you can predict. Another side has already seen too much to go back. The shadow in this pattern is not weakness. It is the fear of what will be lost when you stop pretending that waiting is wisdom. And the light is stronger than you think, because beneath the hesitation there is real courage. Not loud courage, not empty coaching language, but the kind that makes your hands shake a little while your deeper self says, move anyway. You see this in ordinary life more than you realize. You wake up and keep delaying a decision you have already made in private. Maybe it is the conversation you know you need to have, the routine you know you need to break, the application you have left unfinished, the habit that no longer matches the person you are trying to become. You tell yourself you need one more day, one more sign, one more clean feeling, but the truth is sharper than that. The real struggle is that action would make the change real, and once it is real, the older version of you loses its last excuse to stay in charge. That is the small internal climax hidden in option 5. The fear is not only about failure. The fear is that once you step forward, you cannot keep calling your life unfinished. You will have to meet it. You will have to become visible to yourself. Imagine a simple scene. You keep taking the same route home, opening the same door, sitting in the same chair, checking the same messages, living inside the same arrangement that lets you postpone one honest move. Then one evening, something in you hardens in the right way. Not into coldness, but into clarity. You see that your delay has become its own daily ritual, and that ritual is now stronger than your desire. In that instant, the mold cracks. You realize that change will not arrive as a perfect feeling. It will arrive as a decision that creates a feeling afterward. That is why option 5 matters. It marks the threshold where identity stops being something you describe and becomes something you enact. So do not reduce this choice to impatience or rebellion. It is deeper than that. It is the self asking whether you are ready to stop protecting a life that no longer fits. Today, choose the one decision you have delayed the longest and send one clear message of no more than 20 words that makes your next move real and visible to another person. That step is small, but it cannot be taken back in the old way, and that is exactly why it matters. The moment the message leaves your hands, momentum is no longer an idea. It is a fact. And once that happens, you are no longer merely thinking about breaking the mold. You are already stepping out of it, with fear beside you, with courage awake, and with more of yourself finally moving in the same direction. What all 5 choices share is not weakness, but a human pattern that repeats quietly until it is finally seen. In different ways, each cup points to avoidance, to the old reflex of stepping away from what might hurt, change you, or ask something real of you. One person avoids by staying light, another by explaining instead of feeling, another by becoming harder, another by delaying, and another by waiting for transformation while still standing at the edge of it. The forms are different, but the movement underneath is the same. A feeling rises, fear answers, and the psyche builds a style of protection around that moment. This is why the symbolism matters. Ice is not emptiness. Ice is emotion held still. It is psychic energy suspended, waiting for a safer season, and that is a very simple Jungian truth. The mind creates a persona that can function, smile, work, decide and keep moving, while the shadow carries what was not welcomed, not spoken, not trusted, or not fully lived. Then the same pattern repeats in work, in love, in daily habits, in the tone of your messages, in the choices you delay, and even in the strange places where you call something finished when it is only frozen. Stay with this because it matters. The deeper fear is almost never just about the present moment. It is usually about what might happen if you truly feel, if you clearly choose, if you stop protecting the older version of yourself that survived by staying guarded. Hidden fear says, if I soften, I may lose control. If I decide, I may lose approval. If I change, I may lose who I have been. If I speak, I may lose the illusion that everything is still manageable. And yet this is exactly where integration begins. In simple Jungian language, integration is the moment when the parts of you that were split for protection begin to belong to the same life again. Not by force, not by perfection, but by honesty. The shadow is no longer treated like an enemy. The feeling is no longer exiled. The symbol is no longer only a mirror, it becomes a doorway. That is why this ending is also a beginning. You are never choosing only a cup. You are meeting the shape of a defense, and the possibility that it no longer needs to rule you in the same way. The sense of completion comes from seeing the pattern clearly enough to stop calling it fate. The new beginning comes from realizing that what was repeated can also be interrupted. That is the quiet power hidden inside this whole test. The real test starts after this video, because insight by itself is only the first opening, And the deeper movement begins when you return to ordinary life and notice the exact second your old defense tries to take over again. In that second, you are no longer unconscious. You are in relationship with the pattern, and that changes everything. Today, when you notice yourself about to avoid, postpone, explain away, harden, or drift from one honest feeling, pause for 2 full minutes and choose one clear act that brings you back into contact. A message, a decision, a truth spoken out loud, or one promise kept before the day ends. That small act is universal because it turns reflection into embodiment. It teaches your nervous system that presence can replace repetition. It teaches your heart that fear can be felt without being obeyed. And it teaches your deeper self that integration is not a dramatic event reserved for another version of you. It begins here, in one conscious moment, when the ice stops being your only shelter and starts becoming the first sign that something living underneath is finally ready to move. If this found something real in you, do not let it close the moment this video ends, because the part of you that recognized itself here deserves one honest answer before you move on. Leave your number in the comments. Please enter your name. Like this. Subscribe. Watch the next test on your screen right now, not because you owe anyone a performance, but because naming your choice is a quiet way of saying that your inner world matters and that you are ready to meet it with a little more honesty tonight. Some people leave before the meaning lands, but you stayed long enough to feel where the pattern touches your life, and that makes this ending more than an ending. Maybe your number is the place where you keep waiting, or hiding, or holding back, and maybe it is also the place where your next honest step begins. That is why I want this last moment to feel simple and real, like a hand on your shoulder, not a push, just a small reminder that what you saw here belongs to you now. If you felt seen, let yourself answer while the feeling is still warm, because later the mind will try to shrink it into something smaller and safer than it really was. And if this was hard to hear, that matters too, because the things that stay with us after a test are often the things already asking to change. So stay close to what moved in you here, even after the screen changes, and let this be the kind of ending that quietly becomes a beginning. I do not want to leave you with noise, only with one clear invitation to remain honest with yourself after the image fades, because what you felt matters more than any neat explanation. You do not have to prove anything in the comments, and you do not have to sound deep or polished. Just be real enough to leave a trace of yourself here before the night carries you back into your usual rhythm. There is something quietly brave about being witnessed by a symbol and answering it with your own voice, because that is how a private feeling starts becoming a lived choice. So let this close gently and truthfully with you still inside it, not as a viewer passing through, but as a person who noticed a door and decided not to look away. Let that be enough for tonight. A small, true mark that says you were here. You felt something, and you chose not to abandon it at the very end. Then carry that honesty into the next few minutes of your life and see whether the person who watched this can become the person who acts on it. That is where this really begins for you today.